Welcome back to the garden, folks. Today we're going to talk about propagation, and there are many different ways that you can do that in your garden. Not only is propagation helpful for cloning plants that you want to continue on through the season, or perhaps spread out to help other rows like we're doing today. You might just want to bring a plant inside that might not survive a cold Wisconsin winter. You might want to pass on a legacy plant to friends and family that they can cherish for years to come. So there's a lot of really cool reasons to propagate plants. One simple way to do that is through division, which is why I'm standing by these chives right here. But there are a lot of other methods that we'll talk about. An important thing to consider is when we are taking cuttings or layering or grafting, any form of propagation you use, we need to talk about time of year and the life cycle of the plant. An important thing to consider with propagation is understanding how mature a plant is. Is it in the growth process, or has it gone to flower? Is it putting out seeds? The cilantro is a very good example of this. We see tons of flowers here. It has grown very tall, and it's actually starting to put out seeds, as you can see right here. And each one of these little seeds will become a little coriander seed that we can use in the kitchen when we dry them. So we are going to let all of this go to that. Now there are other examples of plants that you can tell are mature or going to seed. And it's pretty obvious with things like basil, anise hyssop, plants in the mint family. So let's take a look at those. So plants like anise hyssop here, you'll see these beautiful purple little clusters form in the center. And this, if you want the plant to continue to bush out, you would want to continually snip these off. And sometimes, depending on where it is, you would even go down a couple nodes. I could cut it here, or I could go all the way down to this next node where I see new growth that could develop if I take it down to there. And this is also good to know for cuttings, since we're talking about propagation. If we cut it up here, basically we only have this growth to keep going. But if we cut it down here, that will provide a node that the roots can grow out of. So another thing to consider is not only the maturity stage of the plant, but also where you take it for the cutting. Again, considering the maturity of the plant, we would not want to take a stem like this that is already in the flowering stage. That is simply because it is programmed to reproduce right now, and it's going to try to develop that flower so it can be pollinated. What we would want to take is a younger offshoot stem. Unfortunately, this plant doesn't have many right now because we have been very diligent about keeping it clean. But we would take a younger stem coming off the side usually that hasn't started to go to flower, and that is what we would want for our cutting. That is still young, still programmed to grow, and that is going to give us the best success. Now let's talk about root growth hormones. First of all, plants put out something called indole acetic acid, and that tells their roots to develop and to keep growing. You can buy in the store this little powder, often sometimes in gel form, that's called Takeroot. There are various other brands, but the main component in here is something called indole butyric acid. And that basically mimics the indole acetic acid that the plant would put out naturally. So it's going to tell the plant to put out more roots, just give you a better chance at your cuttings. Other options for you are honey, cinnamon. Some people swear on a honey cinnamon combo. We also did willow water. And willow water is particularly awesome because willows, regardless of the willow species, are very high in what are called auxins. Auxins are those acetic acid compounds that tell a plant to take root and grow. So willow water is actually a very neat option to use, especially around here in the driftless area. We have a lot of small streams and riverbanks and floodplains, riparian zones where willows really like to grow. So it was very easy to find some young willow shoots, put them in some boiling water, let them sit overnight, and then you have a really good solution to put your cuttings into. Another thing we did was aloe vera. Aloe vera, you want to make sure to get the full leaf, not the bottled gel, and you'll just slice the whole leaf open, and inside where you have all the gel and soft plant tissue, that is where you'll put your cutting on, and that is another natural root growth hormone. Aloe also has a lot of antimicrobial, antifungal properties to it that are going to help fight off pathogens so that your cutting will stay healthy and not rot while it's trying to root. Honey also has those same antimicrobial, antifungal properties, so that's kind of a double whammy. It's going to help your roots grow and keep them healthy and disease-free. So these are just a few options. Things that we did not use, but I also want to note, are apple cider vinegar, a very, very diluted solution of a teaspoon in 5 or 6 cups of water. The higher acidity level is going to, again, fight off pathogens and disease. And the acid compounds are actually going to, again, mimic that acetic acid. We have also considered coconut water, but that needs to come from a fresh coconut. And also crushed aspirin. Now, crushed aspirin has been on the fence. There are, because it has the salicylic acid family in it, it is going to have salicylic acid compounds that will help fight off infection. The other thing about salicylic acid is it's going to tell the plant to defend itself. This is a natural response that can be triggered in plants. Willow water actually has salicylic acid as well. So there are 3 ways that all these growth hormones can really help. They can tell your roots to grow and grow more. They can keep your roots happy and pathogen and disease free. Or they can also simply, like I said with the salicylic acid, provide defense for the plant to fight off infection. So let's get to work and put this guy in the ground, this wonderful cutting that we started. The rest we have already put out into our second plantings, and this guy will go join them. So now we're going to take this cutting of nasturtium and put it at the end of this row where we have planted beets, kohlrabi, and Swiss chard. And this is just going to be another, again, trap plant for us, and also a natural repellent. So we're going to take our cutting, and what you're going to want to do is note where the roots are coming from. They will usually be coming out of any nodes where you cut it before you put it into the water. And these are actually known as adventitious roots. And we'll talk a little bit more about those. But it is very happy and definitely putting out a lot of roots, so we're going to get it in. And there we go. We've got a nasturtium that is going to protect this row for us going into the rest of the season. So we've talked about division and cutting into soil, cutting into water, but another method of propagation is called layering. Layering is done with a lot of vining plants, berry bushes, a lot of plants in the mint family, herbs, very easy to do. And I'll show you how. So what we have here is a very healthy rosemary plant, and what we're doing is simply putting a rock on top of it and giving it some weight so that it is sitting directly onto the soil. And over time, on the underside, this plant will put out what's called adventitious roots. And these are any roots that a plant puts out that are not part of the main lateral root system. So, something you can do with extra woody plants that might not want to put out roots very easy is you can come up onto this underside and actually just give it a little gentle scrape. And that's going to help tell the plant that it needs to defend itself right there. And then when we put it back down, it will try to anchor itself there as it's healing. So this is called layering, and a very good way to take advantage of those adventitious roots that plants put out. Here's another classic example of adventitious roots, and you'll often see this on your tomato plants. They're gonna come up right along the main stem here, and pretty much anywhere on tomato plants. And this is very common. A lot of people will think it is either a larval development or a fungus, but these are just adventitious roots. And basically, the tomato plant either was suffering from too much water or a stress of some sort, or not enough aeration, or perhaps, as in the case of our Florida weeve, it probably just got too compacted with other tomato plants and started to think it needed to send out roots and climb elsewhere. So what we're going to do, this was a piece that we saved from our tomatoes after the heavy storms that we just got. And since it is putting out these adventitious roots, we're going to go ahead and again, put it in the soil and use our methods of propagation to get this guy going. Last but not least, we couldn't talk about propagation if we didn't talk about grafting. Grafting is not something we're going to utilize here in the garden, but it is something that is very common here. It is often done with either apple trees or peppers, and I'll tell you why. Both of those are plants that don't necessarily grow true to seed. That is often the case because of such high rates of cross-pollination. So there are chances that if you get an apple on a tree that you really like and want those exact characteristics of, if you try to save the seeds from that apple and grow it into a tree, there isn't necessarily a good chance that you're going to get the same variety that you want. By grafting, you are cloning that exact plant to get exactly the variety or exactly the characteristics you want. So again, peppers and apples are great examples of plants that don't do this, don't grow true to seed. And we would not want to do it on this guy because he is already putting out fruit. Grafting is often done in early spring, late fall, when plants are either going in and out of dormancy. There can be mid-season grafting done, but it is much more difficult. And again, that just goes back to the life cycle of the plant, like we talked about, and understanding if it's really in its stage of shooting out and growing, or if it's more programmed to go to seed, go to flower, put out its fruit. So that is always an important concept, regardless of the method of propagation that you go for. One last thing to consider when propagating plants, of course, is knowing whether a particular variety you have is perhaps trademarked and protected. And this is only a consideration, really, if you're going to be selling these plants that you're propagating. Otherwise, feel free to continue to clone as you wish. Besides that, we've pretty much wrapped up everything about propagation for the week, and I'm glad you guys tuned in. I look forward to the next time. Until then, happy gardening!